The ice moon of Kalisti 9
No way!
had exactly 3 things going for it. Breathtaking auroras that nobody watched, mineral deposits that nobody wanted, and a research station so remote that getting reassigned here was basically academic exile with better lighting. Immani had been on this frozen rock for 8 months, 22 days, and, she checked her chronometer, 6 hours. Not that she was counting or anything. "Please tell me you found something interesting down there," Toby's voice crackled through her helmet comm, sounding like a man who'd already resigned himself to disappointment. "Because I just spent 3 hours recalibrating the drill's thermal couplings, and if this is another empty chamber, I'm going to reprogram the station AI to only play accordion music." Immani aimed her headlamp into the newly exposed cavity, her breath fogging the inside of her visor. "Define interesting. Literally anything that isn't frozen dirt or 40,000-year-old plumbing?" "Well," Immani swept her light across the chamber, and her heart did a complicated little dance in her chest. "How do you feel about architecture that violates the laws of physics?" Static silence. Then, "I'm sorry, what? Get down here. Now!" The chamber shouldn't exist. That was Immani's first coherent thought once her brain stopped trying to process what her eyes were seeing. The walls curved in ways that made her inner ear scream in protest, angles that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The material, if it even was material, absorbed her headlamp's beam and somehow reflected it back as a different color entirely. "Okay," Toby said, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal as he climbed down beside her. "Okay, so, that's not normal." "You think?" Immani was already moving forward, her scanner beeping frantically as it tried and failed to classify anything in front of her. "Toby, this chamber is in perfect vacuum. Perfect. After 40,000 years. That's impossible." "Yeah, well, add it to the list." She gestured at the walls, where symbols spiraled in patterns that seemed almost fractal, repeating and changing simultaneously. "Because none of this should be here, and yet here, we very much are." At the center of the chamber, roughly where Immani's sense of spatial reasoning gave up entirely and went to have a lie down, something floated. It was spherical, about the size of a basketball, and it pulsed with a light that Immani's brain kept trying to assign a color to, and failing. Not blue, not exactly. More like the concept of blue, having a philosophical debate with purple and settling on something that made her teeth ache. "Is that," Toby began, "hovering in midair with no visible support system?" "Yes." "Without any power source we can detect?" "Also yes." "In a chamber that's been sealed for longer than human civilization has existed?" "You're really grasping the situation here, Toby." "Gold star." He shot her a look through his visor. That suggested the sarcasm was not appreciated. "I'm just saying, maybe we should call this in before we touch anything. You know, like people who value their continued existence." Immani was already pulling out her documentation equipment, holograms flickering to life around her as she began cataloging everything. "We will, right after we get preliminary scans. The consortium takes weeks to approve expeditions, and by then, some bureaucrat will have decided this is too important for the disgraced researcher who got exiled for suggesting that the Council's prohibition on interspecies relationships was maybe, possibly, just a tiny bit xenophobic. You didn't suggest it. You published a 60-page paper with the title Institutionalized Bigotry and You, a critical analysis of why the Council can go. I was very diplomatic about it. You used footnotes to include insults in 12 different languages. That's called thorough research, Toby." The sphere pulsed brighter, and Immani felt something pull at her attention. not physically, though the sensation was almost tactile, but like a word on the tip of her tongue, a memory just out of reach. It was calling to her, which was absurd because objects didn't call to people, and she was a scientist, not some mystical chosen one from a bad adventure serial. "Immani," Toby said, his voice carrying that warning tone he used right before she did something reckless. "You're doing that thing where you make terrible decisions. I can literally see it happening on your face. I'm not touching it. You're absolutely about to touch it. I'm going to document it extensively and then—" She paused, her hand already reaching forward. "Okay, I might touch it a little. This is how people die in horror vids. Those aren't scientifically accurate." Her gloved fingers were centimeters from the surface now, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from it. Warmth. In a chamber that should be absolute zero. Besides, if it wanted to kill us, we'd probably already be dead. That's the worst logic I've ever heard. And I once watched you argue that expired ration packs were technically still food. Immani's finger made contact. The chamber exploded into light. Not fire, not heat, just pure, impossible illumination that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The walls blazed with symbols, thousands of them, millions, cascading across every surface in patterns that almost made sense. Holographic displays erupted from the floor, the ceiling, the air itself, showing star charts that Immani recognized and mathematical formulas she absolutely did not. Data streaming in languages that shouldn't exist. "Immani!" Toby's shout sounded distant, like he was yelling from underwater. "What did you do?" "I have no idea." She tried to pull her hand back, but the sphere held her gently, insistently, like it had more to show her and wasn't quite finished. "But it's beautiful." Then the words appeared. They manifested in the air directly in front of her face, letters 3 feet tall, glowing with that same impossible not-quite-blue light. But these letters she recognized. These letters she'd known since childhood, had written countless times, had signed on papers and permits, and that one very angry resignation letter. Immani, just her name. Floating in perfect modern, shouldn't-exist-here English. The sphere released her hand, and Immani stumbled backward into Toby, who caught her more through luck than coordination. They both stared at the name hovering in the air, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "So," Toby said, his voice very quiet and very carefully controlled. "Just to be clear, that's your name, your actual name, in English, which is a language from Earth, which is on the other side of the galaxy, in a chamber that's been sealed since before English existed, before humans discovered fire, before—" "Yeah," Immani whispered. "I'm getting the picture." "And you said this wouldn't be interesting." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed strangely in the chamber. "I may have miscalculated." The name continued to pulse, patient and persistent, and all around them, the holographic displays cycled through information that would take lifetimes to understand. Star charts showing systems that didn't exist in any database. Mathematical proofs that solved problems Immani hadn't known needed solving. And underneath it all, like a rhythm she could feel in her bones, a countdown. Toby's scanner beeped, and he glanced down at it. Then glanced again. Then made a small, strangled noise. "What?" Immani asked, still staring at her name. "The sphere. I'm finally getting readings on its composition." "And?" "And according to this, it's made of matter that shouldn't be stable. The atomic structure it's like someone took the periodic table and said, 'No thanks, I'll make my own.'" He looked up at her, his eyes wide behind his visor. Immani, this thing is held together by physics that don't exist. Well, she said, trying for levity and landing somewhere near mild panic, that's not ominous at all. Her name pulsed brighter, and suddenly more text appeared beneath it, scrolling slowly upward, awaiting confirmation. Primary operator recognized initialization. Sequence ready. Operator? Toby read aloud. Initialization? Immani? I don't like where this is going. That makes two of us. She stepped closer again, unable to help herself. The sphere was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight, like looking at something that shouldn't exist, but desperately wanted to. But we can't just leave it. Whatever this is, whoever made it, they knew my name. 40,000 years ago, someone knew I would be here. Or, Toby countered, it's a really, really unfortunate coincidence. A coincidence? She pointed at her name, still glowing in the air. My full name. My exact name. In perfect English. That's your theory? I'm grasping at straws here. My alternative theories are either time travel, precognition, or that we're both having a very elaborate shared hallucination brought on by recycled air and poor life choices. The sphere pulsed again, and this time Immani could have sworn it felt amused, which was ridiculous. Objects didn't have emotions, especially not 40,000-year-old impossible objects that knew her name. She reached out again, slower this time, and placed her palm flat against the surface. It was warm, almost body temperature, and beneath her hand she could feel something like a heartbeat. The displays around them shifted, focusing, and suddenly Immani was looking at an image of the galaxy. Their galaxy, but different, marked. Points of light scattered across the spiral arms, pulsing in sequence. And at the center of it all, her name, waiting. Toby, she said quietly, I think we need to call this in after all. You think? But first, she pulled out her personal recorder, the one that backed up to her private server, not the station's official network. First, we document everything, because something tells me that once the consortium gets involved, this stops being about science and starts being about politics. You mean like last time? Exactly like last time. She began recording, her voice steady despite the way her hands were shaking. Personal log, Immani, 8th month of exile on Kalisti 9. Today, we discovered a chamber containing technology that shouldn't exist, displaying my name in a language that shouldn't be possible, in a location that defies every known law of physics and archaeology. She paused, looking at the sphere. And I have absolutely no idea what happens next. The sphere pulsed one more time, and beneath her name, new words appeared. They are coming then. The light dimmed, the holograms faded, and the chamber returned to something approximating normal. If normal meant architecturally impossible room containing a physics-defying sphere that knows things it shouldn't. Toby and Immani stood in silence for a long moment. They, Toby finally said. Who's they? I don't know. Immani pulled her hand away from the sphere, which continued floating peacefully, as if it hadn't just upended everything she thought she knew about the universe. But something tells me we're about to find out. Her recorder was still running, capturing every angle of the chamber, every symbol on the walls. Evidence. Proof. Because when the consortium arrived, and they would arrive, automated alerts had probably already pinged the moment the chamber opened, she needed to make sure her version of events was on record. The version where, for once, humanity had found something first, something important, something that apparently had been waiting for her, specifically, for 40,000 years. So, Toby said, already packing up his equipment with the efficient movements of someone who'd learned to expect the unexpected. On a scale of 1 to career-endingly catastrophic, how bad do you think this is going to get? Immani looked at her name, still faintly visible in the air, and thought about warnings carved in stone by civilizations that no longer existed, about messages in bottles thrown across time itself, about the fact that something had been waiting here, patient and impossibly ancient, for her to arrive. "Toby," she said, "I think we just broke the scale." The next 18 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos, masquerading as scientific process. Immani ran every scan she could think of, then invented 3 new ones. The sphere, she'd started calling it the Relic in her notes, because impossible physics-defying orb was too long to type repeatedly, remained infuriatingly cooperative. It responded to her touch, displayed information when she asked questions, and generally acted like a piece of technology that had been waiting 40 millennia for tech support to arrive. Toby, meanwhile, had appointed himself chief pessimist and was doing an excellent job. "The material analysis came back," he said, squinting at his tablet like it had personally offended him. Or rather, it came back, threw up its hands, and admitted defeat. According to the lab, the relic is composed of elements that technically exist, but in combinations that should immediately collapse into quantum foam. Should being the operative word. Immani was tracing one of the wall symbols with her finger, watching it glow in response. Clearly, someone forgot to tell the relic about what it should and shouldn't do. That's not how physics works. Then physics needs to update its resume, because it's clearly not keeping up. The symbol she'd been tracing suddenly flared bright, and a hologram materialized, a 3-dimensional representation of what looked like a linguistic primer. Immani felt her breath catch. It was teaching her. The relic was actively trying to communicate. "Okay," she muttered, pulling out her stylus to take notes. "Okay, so these aren't random symbols. They're a language. A constructed language designed to be learned by—" Her tablet pinged. Then pinged again. Then began pinging with the insistent rhythm of someone very important, demanding attention immediately. Toby groaned. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Immani checked the notification and felt her stomach drop. "It's exactly what you think it is. The Galactic Archaeological Consortium has dispatched a representative. Arrival in—" she checked the timestamp. "Approximately 20 minutes. Well, it was nice knowing you. Thank you for your optimism and support in this trying time. I'm an engineer. Optimism is how people lose fingers in machinery." 23 minutes later, because apparently even galactic representatives couldn't follow their own schedules, their unwelcome visitor arrived. Licks Mupo descended into the excavation site with all the grace and humility of a tenured professor, arriving to explain why everyone else was wrong. The Kolaki was an impressive specimen, Immani had to admit. 8 tentacles flowing in perpetual motion, 3 eyes arranged in a triangle that somehow conveyed deep disapproval, and a bioluminescent skin pattern that pulsed in what Immani's translator assured her meant intellectually superior. "Immani," the alien said, managing to make her name sound like a gentle correction. "How delightful to finally meet you. I have read your papers. Most of them, anyway. The ones that weren't, how do you humans say it? Absolute rubbish." Toby coughed something that sounded suspiciously like, "Here we go." "Licks Mupo," Immani replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral. "Thank you for coming so quickly. As you can see, we've made a discovery that requires immediate—" Yes. The automated alerts were quite hysterical about it. The Kolaki flowed past her into the chamber, tentacles already producing scanning equipment from somewhere in their anatomy that Immani preferred not to think about. A linguistic anomaly, the system said. Your name appearing in human script. Fascinating coincidence, truly. Coincidence. Immani felt her eye twitch. My full name, in perfect English, in a chamber sealed for 40,000 years. That's your professional assessment? Coincidence? Human names are remarkably common throughout the galaxy. Simple probability suggests that eventually random patterns would. Random patterns don't spell Immani in 21st century English typography. Licks Mupo's eyes swiveled to regard her with what might have been pity. Perhaps your parents were influenced by ancient cosmic radiation that encoded linguistic patterns into their subconscious during conception. The Kolaki have documented 638 cases of such phenomena. Toby leaned close to Immani and whispered, I'm starting to understand why you published that paper. Not helping, she hissed back. The Kolaki had reached the relic now, and Immani felt a sudden spike of anxiety as those tentacles extended toward it. Wait! Standard protocol requires a full spectral analysis using Kolaki technology, Licks Mupo announced. Your human equipment is adequate for preliminary surveys, but for true understanding, I really don't think you should. One tentacle made contact with the relic's surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber screamed. Not audibly, though Immani's ears rang anyway, but through every sense at once. Light erupted from the relic in waves that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Colors that her brain kept trying to process and failing. Patterns that felt like they were being carved directly into her retinas. The energy pulse hit like a physical blow, sending all three of them stumbling backward. Licks Mupo made a sound no translator could capture, somewhere between alarm and profound academic offense. When the light cleared, and Immani's vision stopped doing funny things, the relic had changed. It was still hovering, still pulsing with that not-quite-blue light, but now it was projecting something new into the air above it. A map. Three-dimensional, rotating slowly, showing their galaxy in perfect detail. And there, highlighted in angry red that pulsed like a warning, was a region of space Immani recognized immediately. Oh no, Toby said. Oh no, no, no. That's the null zone, Immani finished, her mouth suddenly dry. That's the null zone. The null zone was where expeditions went to die. A region of space, roughly 1,000 light-years across, where ships entered and never returned, where communication ceased, where even automated probes went silent within hours. The consortium had declared it off-limits 16 years ago after losing the 5th research vessel. And now the relic was helpfully pointing at it with what could only be described as urgency. This is unprecedented, Licks Mupo said, recovering their composure with admirable speed. Their tentacles were already moving, capturing holographic images. A pre-contact civilization with knowledge of galactic geography. This changes everything we know about. It's not just showing us the location, Immani interrupted, moving closer. The symbols around the map were similar to the ones on the walls, but these were more insistent, more immediate. These are coordinates, specific coordinates within the null zone, and this, she pointed at a string of numbers counting downward, this is a countdown. Countdown to what? How should I know? The relic hasn't exactly provided an instruction manual. Toby was running calculations on his tablet, his face growing progressively paler. If this countdown is in standard galactic time units, and that's a big if, We have approximately 68 hours before it reaches 0. 68 hours until what? Licks Mupo demanded, all pretense of academic superiority temporarily abandoned. The relic pulsed, and new text appeared, this time in multiple languages simultaneously. Immani recognized English, Kolaki script, and at least a dozen other alphabets she'd seen in xenolinguistic databases, all saying the same thing. Convergence point. Approaching temporal cascade. Imminent primary operator required. Operator, Immani read aloud. It keeps using that word. Primary operator. That's... She looked at her name, still faintly visible among the projections. That's me. It thinks I'm supposed to operate it. Absolutely not, Licks Mupo said, their skin flashing colors that Immani's translator rendered as official consortium prohibition. This artifact is far too dangerous for human interaction. It will be transported to the central archive, where experts can... The relic flared again, brighter this time, and every piece of equipment in the chamber simultaneously went dead. Licks Mupo's scanners, Toby's tablet, even Immani's backup recorder. Everything except the relic itself, which continued glowing with serene, impossible patience. Or, Toby said into the sudden silence, maybe it has opinions about that plan. More text appeared, and this time there was no mistaking the tone. Authorization required. Immani only unauthorized removal will result in permanent deactivation. Primary operator must proceed to convergence point. Well, Immani said, staring at the words, I guess that settles that. Licks Mupo's three eyes all focused on her simultaneously, which was deeply unsettling. You cannot possibly be considering this. The null zone is a death trap. No one who enters returns. Yeah, I got that from the name. Immani was already moving, though she wasn't entirely sure toward what. The relic? The exit? Some middle ground between cooperation and complete panic? But apparently, I'm the primary operator of a 40,000-year-old device that knows my name and wants me to fly into the galaxy's most notorious dead zone within the next 3 days. So my options are somewhat limited. This is insanity. Welcome to my life. Toby, how fast can we get a ship? Toby looked at her like she'd suggested juggling plasma grenades. Are you actually serious right now? Do I look like I'm joking? You look like someone who's about to make a catastrophically bad decision, which, to be fair, is your default expression. The countdown continued its patient descent. 68 hours. 68 hours until something called a temporal cascade, which sounded exactly as apocalyptic as it probably was. Immani turned to face both of them, Toby with his concern, Licks Mupo with their academic outrage, and felt something click into place. A decision. Maybe a terrible one. But when had that ever stopped her? Listen, she said. I don't know what this thing is. I don't know why it knows my name, or what happens when that countdown hits 0, or why an ancient civilization decided I specifically needed to be involved. But I do know that it's been waiting here for 40,000 years. That's a long time to be patient. And whatever this is, she gestured at the pulsing map, the countdown, the impossible technology surrounding them. It's important. Important enough that someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure I found it. Or, Licks Mupo countered, it is an elaborate trap designed by a long-dead civilization with a grudge against future archaeology. That's the most paranoid thing I've ever heard, and I once watched you spend 3 hours explaining why you thought the cafeteria was plotting against you. The relic pulsed one more time, and Immani felt it again. That pull, that sense of purpose that came from somewhere deeper than logic. The countdown ticked down another second. 68 hours. And counting. "I'm going," she said quietly. "With or without consortium approval. Because apparently, the universe has decided I'm cosmically significant. And I'm not about to waste that by playing it safe." Toby sighed, a sound of profound resignation. "If we die, I'm haunting you. Get in line." The next 36 hours became a blur of sleepless obsession, caffeinated desperation, and the kind of focus that made Toby start leaving protein bars near her workstation like she was a feral animal he was trying to domesticate. Immani couldn't stop. Every time she touched the relic, it revealed something new. Another layer of information, another piece of the puzzle that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The symbols on the walls weren't just decorative. They were a teaching system, a primer designed to help someone, specifically her, apparently, learn the relic's true language. "You haven't slept in 29 hours, Toby said, appearing at her elbow with his 5th intervention attempt. "Your eyes are doing that twitchy thing again." "The twitchy thing means I'm close to a breakthrough." Immani gestured at the holographic display floating in front of her, a cascading wall of symbols that were finally starting to make sense. "Look at this pattern here. It's not just showing information, it's responding to my neural patterns. The relic is adapting its teaching method based on how I learn." "That's fascinating and also deeply concerning. You know it's not alive, right?" "Then why does it feel like it's talking to me?" Toby opened his mouth, closed it, and settled for looking worried. "That's what concerns me." But Immani was already moving past him, her fingers dancing through the holographic interface as pieces clicked into place. The symbols weren't random. They were a story, a message encoded not just in language, but in mathematics, in physics, in the fundamental structure of reality itself. And the story they told was impossible. "Toby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to look at something." He moved closer, squinting at the display. "What am I looking at?" "Temporal mechanics, quantum causality loops. This section here," she highlighted a particularly dense cluster of symbols. "This is a description of timeline collapse. Multiple realities converging, collapsing, ceasing to exist." "Okay, and that's terrifying. But what does it mean?" Immani's hands were shaking now as she pulled up more data, cross-referencing the symbols with the star charts the relic had shown them. "It means the relic wasn't created by some ancient alien civilization. It was created by humans. By us." "That's impossible. Humans have only been spacefaring for 300 years, and this thing is 40,000 years old." "Not our humans," Immani said, and the words felt like ice in her mouth. "Humans from a different timeline. An advanced human civilization that existed in a reality parallel to ours. And they—" She had to stop, had to breathe, because the implications were too vast. "They don't exist anymore. Their entire timeline collapsed. Erased. Like it never happened." The chamber was very quiet, except for the soft hum of the relic. "You're saying," Toby said carefully, "that an entire branch of reality ceased to exist, and before it did, they built this thing and sent it back through time to— what? Warn us?" "Not just warn us." Immani pulled up the countdown, which now read 51 hours. "They encoded my quantum signature into the relic. Me, specifically. They reached across the collapse of their own reality to make sure this message would only activate for one person. But why you?" "I don't know." The frustration bled through her voice. "I'm nobody. I got exiled for writing an angry paper. I'm not special. I'm not chosen. I'm just—" The relic pulsed, and suddenly Immani was seeing things that weren't there. Flashes of images, memories that couldn't be hers because she'd never lived them. A human city that spanned an entire star system. Architecture that made the chamber's impossible angles look simple by comparison. Millions of species living together, not just coexisting, but thriving, creating art and science that transcended anything the current galaxy had achieved. And then, nothing. Darkness rushing in like a wave, erasing everything it touched. Not destroying it, not conquering it, but making it so it had never existed at all. Immani gasped and stumbled backward, and Toby caught her before she fell. "What happened?" he demanded. "Immani, what did you see?" "Everything," she whispered. "I saw everything they lost." The relic continued its patient glow, and more text appeared. A message within a message, nested layers of meaning that Immani was only now beginning to parse. "The entity," she said, forcing her breathing to steady. "There's something out there, not alive, not dead, existing in the spaces between realities. It feeds on collapsing timelines, and it's already started working on ours." "How do you know?" "Because the relic is showing me." She pointed at new data streams appearing in the holographic display. "These are temporal anomalies, causality violations, small ones, barely noticeable, but they're increasing. The entity doesn't destroy realities. It makes them impossible. It unravels the fundamental logic that holds existence together until everything just stops being." Toby looked at the data, then at her, then at the countdown. "And we have 51 hours before what, exactly?" "Before the convergence point. The null zone isn't just where ships disappear. It's where the entity is strongest in our reality. It's a weak point in the fabric of space-time, and in 51 hours, it's going to tear completely. So we're all going to cease existing, unless we stop it. And how exactly do we stop a reality-eating cosmic entity?" Immani turned to face the relic fully, and as if responding to her attention, it began to transform. The sphere unfolded, not mechanically, but like origami made of light, revealing internal structures that looked part navigation system, part weapon, part something she had no words for. "The humans from the erased timeline," she said, watching the transformation with awe. "Before they vanished, they built safeguards, machines hidden throughout the galaxy, designed to stabilize reality and repel the entity. But they need to be activated in a specific sequence, at specific times, from specific locations. Starting with the null zone. Starting with the null zone." A sound behind them made both of them turn. Licks Mupo had been so quiet that Immani had almost forgotten the Kolaki was there, observing everything with those 3 unblinking eyes. "This is," the alien said slowly, "the most extraordinary and terrifying discovery in galactic history." "Yeah, we're getting that impression," Toby muttered. But Licks Mupo was moving forward now, tentacles extended not in aggression, but in something that looked almost like reverence. "I have spent my entire life studying the remnants of dead civilizations. I have catalogued the final words of species that watched their stars die, documented the last transmissions of cultures that knew they were ending. But this—" The alien's skin flashed colors that Immani's translator couldn't quite capture. "This is a message from a civilization that fought against oblivion itself and lost. And they used their final moments not for mourning, but for hope." The relic pulsed in what Immani could have sworn was acknowledgement. "I was wrong," Licks Mupo continued, and the admission seemed to cost the Kolaki something. "Wrong to dismiss you, Wrong to assume this was simple coincidence. Wrong to believe that humanity was too young to understand. The evidence is irrefutable. You are the primary operator. This is your purpose. I don't want a purpose, Immani said, but the words felt hollow. I want to understand why. Why me? Out of billions of humans, trillions of beings across the galaxy, why did they choose me? The relic responded, and this time the message was longer, more complex. Immani felt it downloading into her mind, not as words, but as understanding. Concepts that bypassed language entirely and went straight to meaning. She saw herself, not as she was now, but as variations. Infinite versions across infinite timelines, each one slightly different. In some, she was a teacher. In others, an engineer, a pilot, a parent, a revolutionary. In one particularly odd timeline, she appeared to be a professional musician specializing in an instrument that didn't exist. But in all of them, every single iteration, there was one constant. She never gave up, even when giving up would be easier, safer, more logical. She kept pushing forward, kept questioning, kept fighting for what she believed was right, even when everyone told her she was wrong. The vision shifted, showing her the timeline that had been erased. There was another Immani there, older, scarred, exhausted, but still standing, still fighting. And in the final moments before that reality collapsed, that other version of herself had made a choice. She'd encoded her quantum signature, the fundamental pattern that made her who she was across all possible realities, into the relic. A message to any timeline where another version of her existed. A plea for help from a woman who would never exist to a woman who did. The vision faded, and Immani found tears streaming down her face. She knew, Immani whispered. She knew I would find it, knew I would understand. Because she was me, and she knew I wouldn't walk away from this even if I wanted to. Toby's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. So what do we do? Immani wiped her eyes and looked at the relic, which had finished its transformation. It looked like a navigation device now, sleek and purposeful, with interfaces that her hands seemed to know how to use, despite never having seen them before. We go to the null zone, she said. We activate the safeguards. We save the galaxy from a threat it doesn't even know exists. And if we fail, then we cease to exist, along with everything else. But at least we'll fail trying. Licks Mupo's skin flashed determined blue. Then I am coming with you. The consortium will have my tentacles for this, but some discoveries are worth risking everything. Plus, Toby added with his particular brand of gallows humor, if reality collapses, there won't be a consortium left to punish anyone. So really, it's a win-win. The countdown read 48 hours. Immani picked up the relic. It felt warm and right in her hands, like a tool she'd been meant to hold, and headed for the exit. Let's go save the universe, she said. I've always wanted to add prevented cosmic apocalypse to my resume. Commandeering a research vessel turned out to be surprisingly easy when you had a Kolaki representative willing to abuse their diplomatic credentials and an engineer who knew exactly which protocols to ignore. This is theft, Toby said, expertly bypassing the ship's security systems. It's emergency requisition, Licks Mupo corrected, tentacles flowing across multiple control panels simultaneously. Those are the same thing with different paperwork. Exactly. The paperwork can wait until after we prevent reality from collapsing. The ship, designation Morning Catalyst, which Immani found either prophetic or deeply ironic, launched from Kalisti 9 with minimal fuss and maximum violations of launch protocols. Within minutes, They were accelerating toward the one place in the galaxy that promised certain death. Immani sat alone in the observation deck, the relic cradled in her lap. It had been displaying new information constantly since they'd departed. Coordinates for 6 other locations scattered across the galaxy, each one more remote and dangerous than the last. This wasn't just about saving the timeline. It was about ensuring the survival of countless others. "Why did you choose me?" she whispered to the device. "Really?" The relic pulsed, and text appeared in the air, not holographic this time, but somehow written directly onto her vision. "Because I knew you would ask that question." More words followed, appearing slowly, deliberately. "Because out of infinite versions of us across infinite timelines, you are the one who never surrenders even when surrender would be easier. You are the one who fights for what is right, even when it costs everything. That is not destiny, that is character. Now go save everyone I could not." The message was signed, and Immani's breath caught with her own name. Not her current self, but the other Immani. The one from the erased timeline, the one who had fought and lost, and used her final moments to give someone else a chance. Immani laughed through tears, because, of course, a 40,000-year-old device containing the last hope of an extinct humanity would be this absurdly dramatic. "Talking to yourself again?" Toby appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of something that was technically classified as coffee. "No, talking to myself from a future that never happened, so I can save a present that might not survive." She accepted the cup gratefully. Totally normal. "You know what day it is?" "Time is meaningless when you're breaking causality." "It's Thursday." "Is it?" Immani took a sip and immediately regretted it. "This coffee is terrible." "Yeah, well, we stole a research vessel, not a luxury cruiser. You get what you get." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars streak past as the ship pushed toward light speed. Somewhere ahead, the null zone waited, and somewhere beyond that, an entity that fed on collapsing realities, hungry and patient and utterly inhuman. "I'm scared," Immani admitted quietly. "Good. Fear means you're paying attention." Toby stared into his coffee like it might contain answers. "But if we're doing this, and apparently we are, I'm glad it's with you. You're stubborn, reckless, and your decision-making process is essentially controlled chaos. But you're also the only person I know who would look at cosmic annihilation and say, 'Not on my watch.' That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it." The ship's intercom crackled. "Approaching the null zone perimeter," Licks Mupo announced. "I am detecting significant spatial distortions and several violations of causality that really should not be possible. Also, I would like to note for the record that this was a terrible idea and I regret everything." "Noted," Immani called back. She stood, the relic humming in her hands. "Let's go prevent the apocalypse." The command deck was a chaos of warning lights and alarmed beeping. Through the viewport, the null zone stretched before them, a region of space where stars seemed to flicker in and out of existence, where the laws of physics went to have a nervous breakdown. "Coordinates locked," Toby reported. "We're heading straight into the heart of it." The relic pulsed brighter, projecting a path through the distortions. A roadmap through impossible space, written by people who no longer existed for people who might not survive. Immani placed her hand on the navigation console, and the relic interfaced seamlessly, becoming part of the ship, part of her, part of something larger than any individual existence. "All right," she said, watching the null zone swallow them whole. "Let's show this reality-eating nightmare why humanity doesn't quit." The morning catalyst plunged forward into the impossible dark, carrying 3 unlikely heroes, one extraordinary device, and the last hope of a civilization that had fought oblivion and lost, but had left behind the tools for someone else to win. Behind them, the galaxy continued spinning, unaware that everything it was, everything it could be, balanced on the actions of one exiled xenoarchaeologist who'd been told she wasn't special. She was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. The countdown hit 0, and reality held its breath. The null zone wasn't empty. It was full of screaming, not sound, but the sensation of existence itself being torn apart and stitched back together wrong. Immani's hands moved across the Relic's interface with confidence she didn't feel, following instructions burned into her mind by a woman who was her but wasn't. "There!" she shouted over the alarms. "The stabilization point!" A structure materialized through the distortions, massive, ancient, waiting. The first safeguard. The relic sang in her hands, resonating with machinery that had slumbered for eons. Toby kept the ship steady through impossible turbulence. Licks Mupo called out coordinates that shouldn't exist. And Immani reached out with the relic and activated what her alternate self had built. Light erupted, not destroying, but stabilizing. Reality snapped back into focus like a dislocated joint popping into place. The screaming stopped. Through the viewport, Immani saw it retreating, the entity, vast and hungry and ancient, pulling back from a timeline it could no longer consume. Not defeated, just delayed. Reminded that this reality had teeth. 5 more locations waited, 5 more safeguards to activate, months of work, maybe years. But for now, reality held. "Well," Toby said into the sudden silence. "That was horrifying." "We're alive," Licks Mupo observed, sounding surprised. Immani looked at the relic, which displayed new coordinates and a simple message. "Thank you." Then, beneath it, 6 more to go. "You can do this!" She laughed, exhausted, terrified, exhilarated. No pressure or anything. The morning catalyst turned toward the next impossibility, carrying the woman who'd been chosen not by destiny, but by her own stubborn refusal to let the universe end without a fight. Somewhere in the spaces between realities, an echo of a civilization that never was whispered its gratitude. And Immani whispered back, "You're welcome." Then she got to work saving everything else,